The Galactic Confederation vessel Harmonious Principles hung in the void, its crystalline hull refracting starlight in precisely calculated patterns. Ambassador Xenos stood on the observation deck, 4 hands clasped behind his back in the formal posture of diplomatic readiness. After 3 centuries of service, first contact procedures had become routine. Identify emerging civilizations, establish communication, introduce them to galactic society, and guide them through the carefully established protocols that had maintained peace among the 16 spacefaring species for millennia. Ambassador, the human vessel has adjusted course and will intercept in 17 minutes, reported Communications Officer Gervex, her scales shifting to the pale blue of professional alertness. Excellent. Prepare the standard welcome protocols and linguistic adaptation sequences. Xenos's voice was calm, measured. Another species to welcome into the galactic community, another diplomatic success to add to his distinguished record. Chief Science Officer Valinor burst onto the bridge. His exoskeletal plates flared in the unmistakable pattern of extreme agitation. Ambassador, the approaching vessel, something is wrong with our sensors. Calm yourself, Valinor. What seems to be the issue? The science officer's manipulator appendages trembled as he projected a holographic display of the approaching human ship. Unlike the elegant, mathematically perfect designs of Confederation vessels, the human craft was an ungainly collection of modules, protruding antennas, and seemingly random structural elements. Our sensors must be malfunctioning. They report that this vessel is utilizing a propulsion system that directly manipulates the fabric of space-time through localized matter-antimatter reactions. Xenos tilted his head. And this concerns you because it's impossible. Valinor's voice rose to a pitch that caused several bridge officers to recoil. The energy patterns we're detecting would cause catastrophic cascade failures in any properly designed system. The ship should have disintegrated hours ago. The ambassador frowned. First contacts occasionally revealed unusual technological approaches, but nothing that violated the fundamental astral principles established by the Confederation's founding species 12,000 years ago. Perhaps our understanding of their technology is incomplete, he suggested. Valinor's chromatophores pulsed an alarming shade of crimson. I've recalibrated our sensors 3 times. According to every established principle of astral physics, that ship cannot exist, yet it approaches. The human vessel grew larger on the view screen, its ungainly form somehow managing to move with remarkable grace. Most disturbing to Valinor's scientific sensibilities was the energy signature emanating from what appeared to be the main propulsion system, a chaotic, almost random pattern that defied all logical analysis. They're requesting docking procedures, Gervex announced. Their communication systems are remarkably primitive. Simple electromagnetic wave transmission with binary encoding. Xenos nodded. Grant permission and prepare the reception chamber. Valinor clutched the ambassador's ceremonial robe. With respect, Ambassador, we cannot allow that vessel to dock. The energy configurations violate at least 7 fundamental safety protocols. If their containment systems fail, they've successfully traversed the void between stars, Valinor. Their systems, however unorthodox, appear functional. Functional by blind luck. These humans clearly have no understanding of the principles they're manipulating. The docking process proceeded despite the science officer's protests. The jarring clunk of mechanical seals, rather than the standard resonance field merging, sent another shudder through Valinor's frame. When the airlock cycled open, a human female of average height stepped confidently into the Confederation vessel. Her environmental suit was notably bulkier than necessary, with redundant systems clearly visible at every joint. Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth ship Pathfinder, she announced, removing her helmet to reveal a face set in an expression of what the xenopsychologists would later identify as excited curiosity, rather than the appropriate solemnity of first contact. Hope we didn't keep you waiting too long. Had to recalibrate our Alcubierre Krasnikov bubble mid-flight, when we noticed your ship's position. Valnor's translator implant struggled with several terms, but rendered enough for his respiratory cycle to stutter in horror. You recalibrated your space-time manipulation field while it was active, he managed to ask. Captain Chen shrugged. Had to. Your position was off from our calculations, and we didn't want to overshoot. Nothing major, just a minor adjustment to the exotic matter injectors and a quick reconfiguration of the warp bubble geometry. The science officer's exoskeleton made an audible clicking sound as he struggled to maintain composure. Such modifications would create catastrophic field instabilities. Oh, there were some instabilities, Chen agreed cheerfully, but nothing the emergency containment systems couldn't handle. We only lost about 12% efficiency and had to vent some plasma. Standard procedure. Standard. Valnor swayed slightly. Captain Chen glanced back at her ship through the transparent section of the docking port. The Alcubierre Krasnikov drive gave us a bit of trouble this trip, actually. We might switch back to the quantum fluctuation drive for the return journey. Or maybe the miniaturized artificial wormhole generator, if the engineers can fix the radiation leakage issue. Ambassador Astral, noting Valnor's deteriorating condition, stepped forward smoothly. Captain Chen, we welcome you to the Galactic Confederation vessel Harmonious Principles. We look forward to learning more about your fascinating approach to interstellar travel. Chen grinned. Oh, the warp bubble. That's just our backup system. 3 standard cycles after first contact, the Confederation diplomatic shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere toward the Mars colonial territory. Ambassador Astral had carefully selected his delegation. Valnor, still recovering from his encounter with Captain Chen. Turvex, the Confederation's leading xenoanthropologist, and a security detail that had been thoroughly briefed on human unpredictability. Remember, Astral cautioned as the red planet's surface grew closer, observe protocol at all times. These humans appear to have advanced technologically without developing proper safety parameters. Valnor clutched his data tablet like a talisman. I've reviewed their theoretical physics documents. Ambassador, they have equations that directly contradict each other, yet they use both simultaneously. Perhaps that is why our cultural integration algorithm predicted a 78.3% probability of their extinction within a century, Turvex noted. Such inconsistency suggests a deeply unstable civilization. The Mars shipyard came into view, a sprawling complex of domes, construction gantries, and test facilities stretched across Acidalia Planitia. Most alarming to the Confederation visitors was the complete lack of standardization. Each section appeared to follow different architectural principles, with some structures seemingly built atop the wreckage of previous installations. Engineer Raju Patel greeted them at the landing pad, his environment suit adorned with dozens of unofficial patches and modifications. Welcome to Mars Shipyard. Sorry about the mess. We just had a successful failure in Dome 7. Successful failure. Turvex's translator implant struggled with the contradiction. Blew up exactly how we wanted it to. Patel grinned, leading them toward a transport vehicle that the security detail eyed with visible apprehension. Learned more from that explosion than from the last 3 successes combined. The tour quickly devolved into a security nightmare. In the first research bay, technicians handled exotic materials with shocking casualness, passing containers of what Valnor's scanner identified as metastable degenerate matter between workstations without proper containment fields. Shouldn't that be stored in a null-gravity isolation chamber? Valnor asked, maintaining maximum distance from the workshop. Patel shrugged. Probably. But the isolation systems slow down the workflow, and we found out that this stuff is actually pretty stable if you keep it under 300 Kelvin. Usually. In the next dome, apprentice engineers deliberately overloaded a power coupling, taking notes as it sparked and smoked. What are they doing? Astral asked, unable to conceive of a legitimate reason for such behavior. Stress testing, Patel explained. Manufacturers claim these couplings can handle 50 terawatts, but we don't trust specs we haven't verified ourselves. A young woman noticed their group and waved enthusiastically, her protective gear conspicuously inadequate by Confederation standards. "Hey Raj, we're about to blow the Mark IV containment field if you want to watch." "Maybe later, way," Patel called back, showing our guests around. Turvex's recording appendage trembled as she documented this exchange. They deliberately create containment failures as entertainment. As education, Patel corrected. Best way to learn the real limits of the system is to push until it breaks. The tour's climax came at a heavily secured facility labeled simply Lab 42. Despite the heightened security, the door's locking mechanism had been clearly modified with non-standard components. "This is where the magic happens," Patel announced, leading them into a cavernous chamber dominated by a device that made Valnor flinch visibly. Are you attempting to create a stable artificial singularity?" the science officer whispered. "Close. It's our impossible drive lab." Patel beamed with obvious pride. "We're testing propulsion systems based on principles that conventional physics says shouldn't work." A team of grinning physicists stood around a test apparatus where a small device emitted a pulsing blue light. According to Valnor's instruments, the device was somehow manipulating quantum fields in patterns that should result in immediate molecular dissociation of everything within 50 meters. "This can't exist," Valnor stated flatly. "The materials required to stabilize such field interactions cannot form in our universe." The lab director, a silver-haired woman with numerous burn scars on her exposed forearms, approached with undisguised amusement. "That's what makes it interesting, isn't it? According to all established theories, this drive should tear itself apart. But look," she gestured to a real-time display showing stable metrics. 300 hours of continuous operation. Ambassador Astral, trained to maintain composure in even the most challenging diplomatic situations, found himself struggling. "How do you resolve the theoretical contradictions?" The director shrugged. "We don't, really. Theory is still catching up to results." Valnor's exoskeleton made a sound like cracking ice. "But without unified theoretical foundations, how can you ensure safety? Predictability, reproducibility, redundancy," Patel explained. "Lots and lots of redundancy, and a healthy distance between population centers and test facilities." As if to emphasize his point, a muffled explosion shook the building, causing the humans to check their watches almost in unison. "Right on schedule," the lab director noted. "That'll be the quantum foam density test. Want to see what's left of it." After 3 days of increasingly distressing tours, Valnor finally received permission to examine the engine room of the UES Odyssey, humanity's flagship vessel. Security protocols required Ambassador Astral to accompany him, though the ambassador clearly would have preferred diplomatic discussions to technical inspections. "I must insist on proper containment equipment," Valnor stated as they approached the massive ship docked at Earth's orbital station. Chief Engineer Takashi Yamamoto laughed, the sound echoing inside his minimal environment suit. "If containment fails, those little bubbles won't save you. But sure, wear whatever makes you comfortable." The Odyssey's exterior alone violated 17 distinct Confederation design principles. Its hull featured irregular patterns that Valnor's instruments identified as flow control structures. But the patterns changed subtly as he watched, micro-adjustments occurring in real time. "Is your hull reconfiguring itself?" he asked, unable to hide his alarm. "Smart materials," Yamamoto confirmed. "The outer skin adapts to environmental conditions, saves fuel in atmospheric flight, improves stealth capabilities in certain environments, and helps with heat dissipation during high-energy maneuvers." Valnor's exoskeleton clicked rapidly, but such continuous metamorphosis would create structural weaknesses. "It did in the first 12 prototypes," Yamamoto admitted cheerfully. "Lost some good test pilots figuring that out. Version 13 holds together nicely, though." The engine room itself induced a state of biological shock in the science officer. Unlike the methodically organized, comprehensively shielded propulsion chambers of Confederation vessels, the Odyssey's power core was a bewildering maze of exposed conduits, jury-rigged connections, and components clearly serving multiple functions simultaneously. "This can't be the original design," Valnor whispered, scanning a junction where three technologies that his training identified as fundamentally incompatible had been integrated together. "Oh, hell no," Yamamoto confirmed. "We've modified just about everything. The original design was too conservative, built with big safety margins that wasted potential. We've been optimizing. These systems are fundamentally incompatible." Valnor gestured toward a section where quantum entanglement communicators shared housing with tachyon-based sensors. The feedback loops alone would create cascading interference patterns unless you phase shift the quantum signals by exactly 0.03 picoseconds. Yamamoto completed the sentence. "Yeah, we figured that out after the third junction box melted. Now we use the interference as a power source for the auxiliary life support." Ambassador Xenos, maintaining a dignified distance from the engineering chaos, raised an antenna ridge. "You power life support from an interference pattern that your own theories predict should not exist." "The backup life support," Yamamoto clarified, "primary runs on something more reliable." The tour reached the radiation shielding controls, where Valnor discovered the most disturbing modification of all. The shield configuration displayed on monitors showed settings that deliberately allowed certain high-energy particles to penetrate the outer barriers. "Your radiation shields are incomplete," he noted, voice hollow with horror. Yamamoto grinned. "Selectively permeable. We found that certain radiation types can be captured and converted to power through this catalytic material." He patted a conduit containing a shimmering mercury-like substance. Valnor's handheld scanner identified the material and displayed an urgent warning. "This substance's atomic structure is inherently unstable. The Confederation abandoned research into similar compounds after it killed our leading scientists 3 centuries ago." "Yeah, we found those notes in your shared scientific database," Yamamoto acknowledged. "Good starting point, but you gave up too early. The trick is managing the decay rate through controlled exposure to positron fields." To the alien's visible distress, Yamamoto picked up a physical wrench and began manually adjusting a connection point where the mysterious substance flowed between systems. "You're touching it." Without remote manipulators, Xenos was unable to maintain his diplomatic composure. "Sometimes you need to feel the vibrations to know if it's running right," Yamamoto explained, making another adjustment that caused the flowing material to pulse with a different rhythm. "There, she's purring now." Valnor stared at the human, comprehension dawning. "You're not just breaking established principles. You're breaking them deliberately, methodically, and surviving." Yamamoto wiped his hands on his suit, leaving a faint luminescent smear that would have sent Confederation safety officers into emergency protocols. "Breaking stuff is how we learn what really works," he said with a shrug. "Your rules are based on what you think should happen. Ours are based on what actually does happen when we try things." He pointed to a scared section of wall, where something had clearly exploded in the past. "That's from last year when we tried integrating Confederation shield harmonics with our containment fields. Blew out half the deck, but the data we got, priceless." Ambassador Xenos's skin shifted to the deep indigo of profound philosophical disturbance. "You intentionally test potentially catastrophic integrations on your flagship. Where else?" Yamamoto asked with genuine confusion. "This is where our best engineers work." The diplomatic reception in Earth's orbital headquarters had reached that delicate stage where preliminary cultural exchanges were giving way to more substantive discussions. Ambassador Xenos was carefully explaining the Confederation's technology-sharing protocols to a panel of human officials when the emergency alert sounded. Admiral Helena Sorokina, Earth Fleet Commander, answered the incoming transmission, her face immediately hardening. "Report status. The holographic display showed a human in an environment suit, static distorting the image. Demeter Research Outpost reporting critical situation. Unexpected stellar event at observation target NGC 7729. Neutron star exhibiting unprecedented gravitational fluctuations. Hyperdense radiation storm forming. Station shields at 67% and declining. Estimated shield failure in 12 hours. Valnor moved closer to the display, his scientific interest momentarily overriding his perpetual horror at human technologies. NGC 7729. That's nearly 17 light-years from here. The transmission continued through increasing interference, requesting immediate evacuation assistance. Crew complement of 28 researchers. Critical quantum computation data requires preservation. Understood, Demeter. Admiral Sorokina responded. Maintain position and conserve shield power. Assistance will be dispatched immediately. As the transmission ended, Xenos stepped forward. Admiral, I regret to inform you that your outpost cannot be saved. The physics of the situation are immutable. Excuse me? Sorokina's voice carried the edge that human military personnel seemed to develop after sufficient command experience. The distance is 17 light-years, explained senior theorist Zanvex, who had joined the Confederation delegation that morning. Even your most advanced vessels would require at minimum 7 standard days to reach that location. The radiation storm will overwhelm their shields in 12 hours. Additionally, Valnor added, his voice carrying genuine sympathy, the stellar conditions described would create radiation levels exceeding survival parameters for any known shielding technology. Admiral Sorokina's expression remained unchanged. Thank you for your assessment. We'll take it under advisement. She turned to her communications officer. Contact Captain Okonkwo on the Daedalus. Emergency deployment orders. Zanvex raised a manipulator appendage in the gesture his species used to convey urgent warning. Admiral, please understand. We've studied these phenomena extensively. The radiation values alone would exceed 10,000 Relviks. No shielding can withstand such intensity. With respect, Valnor added, in similar circumstances, the Confederation considers such outposts to be sacrificial. We maintain quantum entanglement communicators specifically to extract critical research data when physical rescue is impossible. Admiral Sorokina's gaze could have frozen nitrogen. We don't leave our people behind. The meeting room door slid open, admitting a dark-skinned human female in a non-standard captain's uniform. Captain Maya Okonkwo of the UES Daedalus moved with the focused intensity of a predator species, crossing directly to Admiral Sorokina without the customary greetings. The Daedalus can make the run, she stated without preamble. My engineers have been testing an experimental configuration of the quantum drive. We can reach Demeter in 9 hours. Xenos exchanged alarmed glances with his science team. Captain, I must respectfully point out that even if you could reach the outpost, the radiation levels would fry standard shields. Yes, Okonkwo interrupted. That's why we're not using standard shields. We've prepared calculations, Zanvex said, projecting a holographic display of mathematical formulae. These represent the minimum energy requirements to maintain shield integrity in such conditions. The power output would exceed the capacity of any vessel smaller than a gas giant. Captain Okonkwo studied the equations for precisely 3 seconds. Your math isn't wrong, but it's incomplete. She projected her own display, showing a configuration that caused Valnor's exoskeleton to emit a sound like shattering glass. The human design showed shield emitters deliberately channeling radiation through the ship's hull at specific points. You would intentionally allow radiation into your vessel. Valnor couldn't contain his disbelief. Controlled absorption and redirection, Okonkwo confirmed. We channel specific radiation frequencies through these conduits, using the energy to reinforce the primary shields. Zanvex's appendages trembled as he analyzed the design. This would require perfect timing and continuous adjustment. The slightest miscalculation would. Would kill us all horribly. Yes, Okonkwo completed the sentence. That's why I'll be manually adjusting the flux myself during the approach. Admiral Sorokina nodded once. Prepare your crew, Captain. Launch in 30 minutes. As Okonkwo turned to leave, Xenos noticed human engineers entering the conference room's side door, carrying components that appeared to have been hastily removed from other vessels. What are they doing? He asked, already dreading the answer. Field modifications, explained Admiral Sorokina. The Daedalus is being optimized for this specific mission. Zanvex watched as the engineers began disassembling parts of the very room they stood in, harvesting components from the communication systems. You're cannibalizing your own headquarters. Time constraints, said one engineer without looking up from her work. No time to requisition parts through normal channels. Captain Okonkwo supervised as they integrated a crystalline component that Valnor recognized with shock as part of a Confederation quantum computer that had been gifted to humanity the previous day. That's an untested integration. Valnor protested. The energy signatures are completely incompatible with human technology. Okonkwo didn't pause her preparations. We're about to find out just how incompatible. The Confederation observer vessel Prudent Distance maintained what its captain considered the absolute minimum safe monitoring range, 12 million kilometers from the Daedalus's projected course. Junior scientist Curvex had been assigned to document the doomed human mission, partly for scientific records and partly as a cautionary example for future diplomatic encounters. They've exceeded conventional warp metrics by 327%. Curvex reported, unable to keep astonishment from his voice. Their structural integrity should have failed 3 hours ago. The observer vessel's captain mandated another 1,000,000 kilometers of separation. Maintain scans, but prioritize our safety. When their containment fails, the energy release will be substantial. Aboard the Daedalus, Captain Okonkwo stood in the center of what conventional naval architects would never recognize as a bridge. Instead of ordered stations with clear demarcation of responsibilities, the command center resembled a chaotic laboratory. Crew members moved between positions as needed, holographic displays overlapped in seemingly random patterns, and the captain herself monitored a physical interface connected directly to the ship's shield modulators. Approaching radiation front, announced navigator Elena Rodriguez, her hands dancing across 3 separate control surfaces simultaneously. Density exceeds sensor capacity for accurate measurement. Conventional approach vectors all show fatality probabilities above 99.8%, reported the tactical officer, a lanky man whose uniform bore scorch marks from recent equipment failures. Captain Okonkwo studied the 3-dimensional rendering of the hyperdense radiation storm, now visible through the ship's forward sensors. The neutron star's unexpected behavior had generated a maelstrom of lethal particles, spreading outward in patterns that defied standard predictive models. Standard approaches assume we should avoid the high-density regions, Okonkwo said, her voice betraying no fear as she contemplated the seething storm that had already claimed 3 of Demeter's outer sensor arrays. What if we do the opposite? Rodriguez paused her calculations. You want to go through the densest part. Specifically through this formation, Okonkwo indicated a spiral structure of particularly intense radiation. The pattern suggests rotational coherence. If we match our shield harmonics to the rotation, we could ride the wave rather than fight it. Chief Engineer Yamamoto completed, already adjusting configurations, like surfing a tsunami instead of trying to outrun it. Over the communication channel, the Confederation observers broke protocol to transmit an urgent warning. Human vessel Daedalus, you are plotting a course through radiation densities that will immediately overwhelm any known shielding technology. Alter course immediately to minimum survival trajectory. Rodriguez muted the channel with a dismissive gesture. They're still thinking conventionally, treating the storm as an obstacle rather than a medium. Prepare for radiation surfing, Okonkwo ordered, securing herself to a modified acceleration couch that bore little resemblance to its original design. Divert all non-essential power to the adaptive shield matrix. Non-essential including life support to decks 3 through 7. Confirmed, Yamamoto. Those sections are evacuated and depressurized. As the Daedalus penetrated the storm's outer boundary, the ship's external temperature monitors registered values that caused several backup systems to assume sensor malfunction. The hull began to glow with absorbed energy, the smart materials struggling to redistribute heat faster than it accumulated. Shield harmonics holding at 82% match with radiation patterns, reported Yamamoto. Not good enough for full surfing effect. Okonkwo studied the readings, then made a decision that would later become legendary in Confederation archives. Invert the polarity of the secondary shields. Route the bleed-through directly into the warp drive initiators. Even her own crew froze momentarily. Captain, Rodriguez said carefully, that would create a feedback loop between the shields and the drive. The energy cascade would either tear us apart or create a self-reinforcing field that uses the storm's own energy against it. Okonkwo completed. Theoretical physics supports both outcomes. Let's find out which one occurs in practice. Implementing insane configuration now, Yamamoto announced with a grin that would have given Valnor respiratory arrest. His fingers flew across the controls, making adjustments that no simulation would ever recommend. The effect was immediate and spectacular. As the reconfigured shields interacted with the radiation storm, the Daedalus became surrounded by a corona of blue-white energy that flowed like liquid along the ship's hull before being channeled into the drive systems. The vessel accelerated dramatically, riding the radiation wave like a surfer on the face of a perfect break. It's working, Rodriguez exclaimed as their velocity increased beyond anything the engines alone could achieve. We're actually using the storm to propel us. On the bridge of the prudent distance, Curvex watched in scientific shock as his instruments registered the impossible. They're creating a previously unobserved state of matter at the ship's boundary layer, he reported, voice hollow with disbelief. The radiation is being converted into. I don't have terminology for this phenomenon. The human vessel streaked through the storm, trailing a wake of transformed particles that the Confederation sensors struggled to categorize. Monitoring devices overloaded and failed one after another as they attempted to record data that fell outside established physical parameters. How are they navigating? The Confederation captain demanded. Their sensors should be completely saturated. Curvex adjusted his instruments again, focusing on the human bridge. The navigator appears to be feeling the patterns. She's not using conventional instrumentation at all. Indeed, Navigator Rodriguez had abandoned her standard controls entirely. Her hands now rested on what appeared to be bare metal contacts extending from the ship's sensor array. Her eyes closed in concentration as she guided the vessel through the storm by directly interpreting the radiation patterns through haptic feedback. 3 minutes to Demeter, she announced, her voice strained from the direct neural interface. But we're going to lose the primary cooling systems before we arrive. As if summoned by her prediction, a cascade of warnings flashed across the bridge displays. The temperature in critical systems climbed toward theoretical failure thresholds as the radiation overloaded the heat dissipation capabilities. Yamamoto studied the warnings for approximately 2 seconds before reaching a decision that no Confederation engineer would consider for even a nanosecond. Bypassing cooling systems entirely, he announced, routing excess heat directly into the warp field generators. That will create a plasma state at the field boundaries, Okonkwo noted, not as an objection but simply acknowledging the fact. Yep, Yamamoto agreed cheerfully. Let's find out what happens. What happened, as the Confederation observers recorded with scientific horror and reluctant admiration, was yet another impossibility. The overheated systems created a plasma sheath that should have destroyed the vessel's electronic systems. Instead, the plasma formed patterns that reinforced the warp field, creating a previously theoretical state that Confederation physicists had named electronic asymptotic protection, but had never observed in practice. They're not just surviving the storm, Curvex whispered, watching his instruments record data that would rewrite textbooks. They're becoming part of it. Over the comms, the Confederation observers heard the human crew cheering as their monitoring instruments melted. The Demeter research outpost hung in space like a wounded animal, its outer sections already blackened by radiation exposure. 3 of its 4 primary shield generators had failed, with the 4th operating at 31% capacity. Inside, 28 researchers huddled in the central core, where the layered protection offered a few more hours of survival at most. Dr. Eliza Chakrabarty, the outpost director, checked the radiation counters for the 5th time in as many minutes. Outer hull breach in Section 7. Automatic seals holding, but structural integrity is compromised. Her second-in-command, Dr. Marcus Kim, monitored the neutron star that had betrayed them with its unexpected behavior. The radiation peak will hit us in approximately 22 minutes. When it does, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Any response to our distress call? Asked a junior researcher, her voice carefully controlled despite the circumstances. Earth received our transmission, Chakrabarty confirmed. But even if they dispatched a rescue immediately, physics doesn't allow. The proximity alarm interrupted her. Something was approaching. Fast. Kim stared at the sensor display in disbelief. That's impossible. Nothing can move through the storm at that velocity. On the main view screen, a ship appeared, or what had once been a ship. The UES Daedalus now resembled a comet more than a vessel, wreathed in plasma and trailing a wake of particles that defied categorization. Its hull glowed with absorbed energy, pulsing with patterns that suggested the metal itself had taken on properties more akin to living tissue than inert material. "This is Captain Maya Okonkwo of the UES Daedalus," came a transmission distorted by interference. "Demeter Outpost, prepare for emergency evacuation. We're coming alongside." Chakrabarty exchanged glances with Kim. "Captain, our outer docking ports are compromised. And the radiation levels." "We're well aware of the radiation," came the reply, with what sounded disturbingly like amusement. "We've been swooning in it for the past hour." The Daedalus maneuvered alongside the research station with impossible precision, considering its transformed state. Through the outpost's few remaining external cameras, Chakrabarty watched in astonishment as the ship's hull seemed to ripple, forming new structures that extended toward the station. "What are they doing?" Kim whispered. The answer came as the Daedalus initiated a procedure that no rescue manual in the galaxy would recommend. It extended its warp field, the very fabric of manipulated spacetime, to encompass the entire outpost. Aboard the Confederation observer vessel, now forced to retreat to an even greater distance, junior scientist Curvex recorded the phenomenon with scientific reverence. They're attempting to integrate the station into their warp field using a frequency modulation technique our scientists deemed theoretically unworkable centuries ago. "Theoretically unworkable seems to be their specialty," the captain responded dryly. Inside the Daedalus, conditions had deteriorated beyond what any shipbuilding standards would classify as survivable. Bridge temperature had reached 57 degrees Celsius despite emergency cooling measures. 6 of the 8 primary computer nodes had failed, and the remaining 2 operated at reduced capacity. The main view screen had melted partially, creating an abstract sculpture of flowing components that somehow still displayed critical information. "Warp field extension complete," reported Chief Engineer Yamamoto, his uniform soaked with sweat and coolant fluid from a ruptured conduit. "But the power drain is creating fluctuations in the main drive." Captain Okonkwo, now operating shield controls manually due to automated system failures, nodded. "Expected. Compensate by rerouting power from the structural integrity field." Even her hardened crew paused at this order. "Captain," Yamamoto said carefully, "if we reduce structural integrity during field extension, the ship will start to tear itself apart." Okonkwo finished. "I'm aware. We need 37 seconds to complete the evacuation. We can hold together that long." As if to punctuate her assessment, A support beam groaned overhead, metal deforming under stresses it was never designed to withstand. Initiating evacuation protocol, Rodriguez announced, her hands dancing across the remaining functional controls. Emergency transit tubes extending to Demeter's core section. What followed was a procedure so reckless that Curvex, observing from afar, was forced to create new scientific terminology to describe it. The Daedalus extended physical connections to the research outpost while simultaneously modifying its own internal configuration to accommodate 28 additional personnel and critical research materials. The ship was, in effect, performing major surgery on itself while in motion through lethal radiation. They're detaching the entire habitat module. Curvex reported in disbelief. Not just evacuating the personnel, they're physically integrating a section of the outpost into their vessel. The Demeter's central core, a cylindrical habitat section containing the researchers and their irreplaceable quantum computation data, separated from the rest of the station. Guided by tractor beams that flickered and stabilized erratically, the module moved toward the Daedalus, which had opened its midsection like a predator preparing to swallow prey. As the radiation peak approached, the Daedalus's structural integrity reached critical limits. Sections of outer hull peeled away in the tremendous heat, vaporizing instantly in the radiation storm. Warning signals blared throughout the vessel, only to be systematically silenced by crew members who needed no reminder of their imminent destruction. Structural failure in 30 seconds, reported Yamamoto, his voice clinical despite the chaos surrounding him. Habitat module docking in 28 seconds. Tell everyone to hold on to something, Okonkwo ordered. This landing won't be smooth. With a grinding impact that reverberated through both structures, the Demeter module locked into the Daedalus's waiting embrace. Emergency seals deployed, some functioning as designed, others improvised by crew members using materials never intended for such purposes. Habitat secure, Rodriguez confirmed. All researchers accounted for. Warp engines at critical threshold, Yamamoto reported. We have one chance to break free before total system failure. Captain Okonkwo assessed the situation for precisely 1.3 seconds. Initiate emergency warp. Navigator, plot the shortest possible course out of the radiation field, regardless of structural strain. The ship can't handle that acceleration in its current state, Rodriguez warned. Okonkwo's smile was fierce. The ship doesn't need to survive intact. It just needs to survive long enough. As the radiation peak struck, the Daedalus seemed to convulse. Its warp field, already stressed beyond design parameters, fluctuated wildly before coalescing into a configuration that Confederation physicists had calculated would result in immediate drive collapse. Instead, the field stabilized for exactly 2.7 seconds, just long enough for the vessel to tear free from the storm's grasp in a maneuver that left a visible wound in the fabric of space-time itself. The Confederation observers, watching from their safe distance, recorded the impossible once again. The Daedalus, partially disintegrated, systems failing catastrophically, somehow maintained enough coherence to escape the killing zone with its precious human cargo intact. They did it, Curvex whispered. Using methods that violated every established principle of astrophysics, they actually did it. His captain stared at the readings, mandibles clicking in the gesture of his species' profound disquiet. The question remains, what's left of them after such abominations of procedure? The thing that limped back toward Earth barely resembled a spacecraft by any conventional definition. The UES Daedalus, or what remained of it, moved through space like a wounded animal, trailing radiation and debris. Its hull had been partially transmuted by the extreme conditions, with sections glowing with residual energy and others displaying properties that defied material science. The hastily integrated Demeter habitat module protruded awkwardly from the vessel's midsection, connected by a combination of standard docking mechanisms and improvised structures that appeared to have been created during the rescue itself. Approaching Earth defense perimeter, announced Navigator Rodriguez, her voice hoarse from the superheated air she'd been breathing for hours. Only 2 of the bridge's environmental systems remained functional, and those operated at minimal capacity. Status of our guests? Captain Okonkwo asked, dabbing at a radiation burn on her forearm with casual indifference. All 28 researchers alive, reported the medical officer. 17 requiring treatment for radiation exposure, but no critical cases. Their habitat module shielding held better than expected. And our crew? 14 confirmed radiation exposures exceeding fatal thresholds, came the clinical reply. All still functional at present due to the emergency anti-rad treatments. Okonkwo nodded as if receiving a routine weather report. Inform medical to prepare the regeneration protocols. We'll need everyone at treatment stations within 2 hours. What the captain didn't mention, what everyone aboard already knew, was that the emergency anti-rad treatments involved experimental nanomaterials injected directly into the bloodstream, creating temporary cellular protection that would itself become toxic within 48 hours. The procedure was classified as extreme experimental in medical databases, yet the crew had administered it to themselves without hesitation when conventional radiation remedies proved insufficient. As Earth's orbital defense platforms came into visual range, the prudent distance emerged from its own warp transit, maintaining what its captain still considered minimum safe distance from the transformed human vessel. Junior scientist Kirvex, who had volunteered to board the Daedalus once it reached safety, prepared his specialized environmental suit. His superior had argued strenuously against the assignment, citing the unknown effects of whatever physics-defying phenomena the humans had unleashed. Kirvex had insisted, arguing that direct observation was the only way to truly understand what had occurred. Remember, his captain warned, maintain standard contamination protocols. Do not touch anything without proper scanning. Do not accept any offers of food, drink, or medical assistance from the humans. Kirvex acknowledged the instructions, but his attention was fixed on the readings from the Daedalus. The hull material. Sir, it's registering as an unknown alloy. According to these scans, portions of their outer plating have somehow transmuted into elements that cannot naturally form in our universe. Their recklessness has created abominations of matter. The captain replied grimly. Document everything, but maintain your distance from these violations. When Kirvex's shuttle docked with the Daedalus, the young scientist was prepared for many outcomes: structural collapse, lethal radiation, even the possibility that the humans themselves might have been transformed by their exposure to theoretical physics states. What he wasn't prepared for was the scene that greeted him when the airlock cycled open. Captain Okonkwo stood waiting, alongside Chief Engineer Yamamoto and 3 other crew members. All showed visible signs of radiation exposure: skin burns, capillary hemorrhaging visible in their eyes, patches of hair loss. Yet instead of the expected lethargy and disorientation of severe radiation sickness, the humans appeared energized, almost euphoric. Welcome aboard, junior scientist, Okonkwo greeted him. Forgive the mess. Home improvement projects are always disruptive. Kirvex's sensors immediately detected radiation levels that should have rendered the reception area uninhabitable. Captain, my instruments indicate this section is still highly contaminated. Your crew should be evacuated immediately for medical treatment. Yamamoto grinned, the expression ghoulish against his radiation-marked features. Probably. But first, we want to show you something extraordinary. They led the reluctant scientists through corridors that twisted in ways the original blueprints never intended. Sections of the ship had been warped by space-time distortions, creating geometries that seemed to defy Euclidean principles. In one corridor, Kirvex was certain they walked uphill in both directions. The radiation exposure created unusual effects in our smart hull materials, Okonkwo explained, running her hand along a bulkhead that rippled at her touch. It's responding to neural impulses now, becoming something new. The ship wasn't just damaged, Kirvex realized with growing scientific awe. It was transformed. The radiation storm had catalyzed changes in materials that theoretical physics had only speculated about in its most heretical corners. Metals behave like living tissue. Energy patterns flowed through solid matter, and in some sections, light itself bent around objects in ways that suggested the local laws of physics had been subtly rewritten. At the ship's core, where the engines had once been, something entirely new had formed. What CureVex saw there would eventually be described in a 37-page scientific report that the Confederation Council would initially classify as potentially psychologically damaging. The power core had evolved beyond its design, becoming a pulsing nexus of energy that existed simultaneously in multiple quantum states. It shouldn't exist, CureVex whispered. Yet here it is, Yamamoto replied simply. We're calling it a dimensional fold reactor. It's drawing energy from elsewhere. When CureVex finally returned to the Confederation vessel 3 days later, he was visibly changed. His exoskeleton bore unusual radiation patterns that the medical team could not explain, and his neural scans showed activity in regions previously thought dormant in his species. I assisted them, he announced to the shocked reception committee. I violated 18 core principles of astral physics, and I now understand why they work. Meanwhile, on Earth, the Daedalus crew, despite radiation exposure that should have been fatal, underwent treatments that left Confederation medical observers speechless. Rather than showing deterioration, the humans displayed signs of adaptation. Cellular structures had been damaged and rebuilt along slightly different patterns, incorporating the nanomaterials from their emergency treatments into new biological configurations. When the Confederation Science Council demanded explanations for the ship's transformed state, the human engineers provided data that contradicted centuries of established theory. Power system configurations that should have resulted in catastrophic cascade failures instead created stable, self-sustaining reactions. Materials exposed to radiation that should have broken down molecular bonds had instead formed new compounds with properties no laboratory had ever produced. Senior theorist Zanvex spent 3 days analyzing the information before facing a profound realization. They didn't survive by defying the laws of physics, he explained to the anxiously waiting Science Council. They discovered that the laws themselves were incomplete approximations. He projected a holographic model that incorporated the Daedalus data into existing theoretical frameworks, revealing patterns that had always been present but never recognized. They're not breaking rules, Zanvex concluded, his voice hushed with the weight of paradigm shift. They're revealing the exceptions that prove our understanding is merely a shadow of deeper principles. In his private quarters, Valnor absorbed the reports with growing comprehension. The humans hadn't just rescued their people, they had discovered truths that the Confederation's careful, methodical approach to physics might never have uncovered. The revelation was simultaneously humbling and exhilarating. They don't need to fully understand why their technologies work, he murmured to himself. They build first and theorize later, operating on incomplete models that they continuously refine through practical application. It was a beautiful blasphemy against everything he'd been taught about proper scientific method. And it worked. 6 months after the Daedalus incident, a ship unlike any before it hung in Earth orbit. The vessel, christened Paradigm Shift, represented the first true collaboration between human and Confederation engineering philosophies. Its sleek lines incorporated both the mathematical precision favored by Xenos designers and the adaptive, somewhat irregular patterns that humans had discovered provided unexpected benefits during stress events. On the observation deck of Earth's orbital headquarters, Ambassador Xenos stood alongside Admiral Sorokina, watching final preparations for the ship's maiden voyage. I never expected to see this day, the ambassador admitted. When my mission began, I anticipated guiding humanity into conformity with established astral principles. Instead, we broke all your rules and somehow didn't die. Sorokina finished with the directness that still occasionally startled her diplomatic counterpart. More than that, Xenos corrected. You revealed that our principles, while not wrong, were incomplete. The Confederation Science Council's latest proclamation makes this official. Theoretical models must now be validated through practical application before being accepted as doctrine. The Admiral smiled. Took us blowing up half our test facilities to figure that out. Nearby, Valdenor and Yamamoto huddled over technical specifications, engaged in what had become a daily ritual of good-natured disagreement. The once horrified science officer now actively sought opportunities to challenge his own assumptions, while the human engineer had developed an appreciation for the benefits of theoretical modeling before physical testing, especially for larger systems where failures could be particularly catastrophic. The quantum resonance stabilizers still show harmonic interference patterns at full power, Valdenor noted, highlighting a simulation result. Yamamoto nodded. We saw that in the physical tests too. But watch what happens when we deliberately enhance the interference instead of trying to eliminate it. He adjusted the parameters, causing the simulation to display an unexpected emergent stability pattern. Counterintuitive, yet effective, Valdenor acknowledged. I would never have considered intentionally amplifying the dissonance, and I wouldn't have known exactly where the harmonic nodes would form without your calculations, Yamamoto replied. Better together, right? The real focus of attention, however, was the Paradigm Shifts Bridge, where Captain Maya Okonkwo was completing final launch preparations. Like Okonkwo herself, the ship bore visible marks of transformation. The captain's previously dark hair now showed streaks of silver, not from age, but from the cellular changes catalyzed during her radiation exposure. Similar traces of her experience manifested in subtle ways. Eyes that sometimes reflected light at unusual angles, skin with a faint luminescence visible in low-light conditions. Medical science had named the condition adaptive cellular restructuring, and it affected all Daedalus survivors to varying degrees. Rather than debilitating them, these changes had integrated into their biology, conferring resistance to radiation and other environmental extremes. The Confederation's Bioethics Committee was still debating whether to classify these changes as enhancements, side effects, or an entirely new evolutionary branch. Kiravex, now promoted to senior researcher based on his groundbreaking work integrating human empirical data with Confederation theoretical models, supervised the installation of the Paradigm Shifts revolutionary propulsion system. His own transformed biology, less dramatic than the humans, but equally significant for his species, had become an asset rather than a concern, allowing him to work in environments that would have been hazardous to unmodified members of his kind. Final diagnostics complete, he reported. The dimensional fold reactor is stable across all measured parameters and several theoretical ones as well. The ship's drive incorporated technologies deemed mutually exclusive by traditional astral principles. Quantum entanglement field generators working in concert with gravitational wave manipulators, all powered by the revolutionary reactor based on the accident-born discovery aboard Daedalus. Preliminary tests showed performance exceeding all previous benchmarks by several orders of magnitude. As launch time approached, dignitaries from Earth and 16 Confederation species gathered for the ceremony. Ambassador Xenos presented Captain Okonkwo with the Order of the Cosmos, the Confederation's highest honor. 6 months ago, I would have described your actions as reckless violations of established principles, he said, his voice carrying to the assembled crowd. Today, I recognize them as the catalyst for a new era of understanding. You have taught us that principles exist not as boundaries, but as starting points. Okonkwo accepted the medallion with characteristic understatement. We just did what needed doing. The physics worked itself out. The Paradigm Shifts mission would have been considered impossible before the Daedalus incident. A direct transit to the Andromeda Galaxy, a journey previously calculated to require millions of years, even with the most advanced Confederation drive systems. Now, utilizing the new understanding of space-time interactions, discovered through humanity's principle-breaking approach, the ship would attempt to reach the neighboring galaxy within weeks. As the crew, a carefully selected mix of human and Xenos specialists, made final preparations, a young Xeno engineer named Turlura approached her human mentor. Though fresh from the Confederation's most prestigious technical academy, She had requested assignment under human supervision, part of the new generation eager to combine theoretical rigor with practical experimentation. "What if we fail?" she asked, her voice carrying the harmonics of genuine concern, rather than mere theoretical consideration. The human, a veteran of the dataless mission named Rodriguez, grinned in response. "Failure is just the universe telling us we found something interesting." As the paradigm shift engaged its impossible drive, preparing to attempt a journey deemed unachievable by generations of scientists, the expressions on the faces of the mixed crew told the story of this new era. The humans showed their characteristic excitement at venturing into the unknown, but now the Xeno crew members displayed similar anticipation rather than dread. In the final moment before departure, the ship vanished in a burst of energy that created new entries in physics databases across the galaxy. The phenomenon, already being called a Rodriguez-Turlera translocation, defied complete explanation even by the new hybrid theoretical models. On the observation deck, Valnor watched the readings with an expression his species used to indicate profound philosophical satisfaction. "They were right," he told Xenos. "The universe doesn't care about our principles. It follows its own rules, which are far more complex and beautiful than our approximations, and more forgiving of experimentation than we believed," the ambassador added. Admiral Sorokina's smile held both pride and amusement. "That's what we've been trying to tell you. The universe doesn't punish curiosity, it rewards it." Across Earth and 16 Confederation homeworlds, scientists began furiously rewriting textbooks, incorporating the flood of new data from human expeditions and their own newly emboldened experimental programs. Principles that had remained unchallenged for millennia were being tested, refined, and sometimes completely reconstructed. Meanwhile, in shipyards across the galaxy, engineers were already designing the next generation of vessels, ships that would have been deemed impossible, unsafe, or simply absurd just months earlier. They incorporated the lesson that humanity had taught the stars. Principles are meant to be tested, boundaries are meant to be pushed, and the universe has far more to reveal to those brave enough to ask questions with their hands rather than just their minds. As the Confederation's most conservative theorists debated the implications, humans simply smiled, already planning the next impossible thing.